Just a heads up at the beginning of the video if my voice sounds weird. I had a horrible flu at the beginning of the month, lasted like a week, and my voice has been gone pretty much since then. So this whole month I've had trouble talking and my voice probably sounds really weird, which is bad because I currently have a lot of videos I want to get done. But let's start with this one. So as a huge horror movie fan, especially a huge classic horror movie fan, it's no surprise that I went and saw the new Nosferatu. I was definitely in the camp of people saying, I don't think we need a new Nosferatu film. Haven't we told the story of Dracula in movies a billion times? But at the same time, I wasn't opposed to it because I love the story of Dracula. It's timeless and I feel like it can be told a million times. I do find it funny, however, that we have established Nosferatu as a separate intellectual property than Dracula, pretty much. Like, you can have adaptations of Nosferatu, like in the 70s there was Nosferatu the Vampire, and people act like it's his own thing, like, oh, it's a Nosferatu remake, but it's like Nosferatu was a remake of the Bram Stoker novel Dracula. The only reason the names were changed to Orlok and Thomas and all that from Dracula and John Harker was because Bram Stoker's widow was still alive and she legally was fighting them on making a film based on Dracula. So they had to change the names of the characters to pretend it wasn't Dracula. And in the new one, they use the original names that they used in the changed version of the 1922 film, even though at some point, I don't know when, I believe when it came to home video in the 80s and 90s, they switched everything back to being the names of the characters from Dracula, like the original film was going to have. So every print of Nosferatu that you see, the original 1922 one, is probably still going to retain the names Dracula and Mina and John, just like Bram Stoker's novel, because by the time they started putting it on home video, Dracula had been a public domain story for a very long time. But in this one, they use the names like Count Orlok and all that. So it's kind of funny that we pretend that Nosferatu is its own thing when it's really just Dracula. I mean, this movie is just 100% the story of Dracula, even to the point where they bring in a lot of characters like Dr. Seward that were in the book Dracula, but not in the movie Nosferatu. And they change their names around, kind of explicitly saying this is not a remake of the 1922 film, this is just another adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel, and we took some light inspiration from the 1922 film. I know in print of the 1922 film, there's that little weird segment where there's a scientist teaching a bunch of students about carnivorous plants that comes out of absolutely nowhere, and a lot of the prints call him Dr. Van Helsing, but that character really isn't Dr. Van Helsing and he doesn't really do anything in the film. But the character that is essentially Dr. Van Helsing is played by Willem Dafoe in this movie, and I either forgot or didn't know Willem Dafoe was going to be in the film. So when he showed up, I was very pleasantly surprised because he is always a delight to watch, especially with this being a Robert Eggers film. And as I've stated on this channel before, I love The Lighthouse, and Willem Dafoe is amazing in that movie. So seeing a Robert Eggers movie with Willem Dafoe, in my mind, is always a good thing. And Willem Dafoe is great in this film. So I guess I'll break it up into things I like, things I didn't like, and then my overall thoughts. For things I liked, the first thing I will say is just this simple idea of going to the theaters and watching a film version of the story of Dracula in 2025 is pretty amazing. I love this story. I love the original novel. I love so many of the film adaptations, including the ones called Nosferatu, that I never get bored of it. I always love seeing new artistic takes on it, new interpretations of it, and it's just a lot of fun. And I was genuinely into it when I was watching it in the theater, just waiting for all of the best parts to happen, or thinking like, ooh, I wonder what they're going to do to this part of the story. I wonder how they're going to twist this part of the story and what their new take on this is going to be. So just the simple fact that I was watching a Dracula film was a delight. The fact that they're still making movies based on that classic novel is a delight. I'd say another thing that I admired a lot is the visuals. I think Robert Eggers, that goes without say. He does a great job at establishing atmosphere, establishing an environment, and getting just like really beautiful shots, like really well done shots that look like you could just hang them on a wall. They're just really beautiful. The composition of everything is just perfect. There's a lot of parts where I'm just gonna, by the way, I'm just gonna call everyone by their names from the Dracula novel. I'm not gonna call them Thomas and stuff because I remember the Dracula novel. That's how I remember all these characters. So I'm just gonna call the main male protagonist John Harker. So there's the part where John is traveling to the Count's castle, and you just get a lot of really good shots. There's especially a part where there's like this very dark, like very almost man-made looking straight path through a bunch of pitch black trees, where it's almost like a big cross in the road. I think it was intentional to look like a giant cross, but you have Jonathan Harker walking through that, through the cold, and that's when the coach comes. Dracula comes with the coach. And those shots at that part looked so good. I thought that was just like beautiful set design, beautiful atmosphere. They did a really good job with that one. There's so many parts in Dracula's castle that look so cool. And the castle itself looks really good, but then when you have those dim lit rooms, it's like it creates that feeling that it's cozy enough that you feel good to be out of the cold, dark outdoors, but it's dark and creepy enough that you don't feel safe and you feel like anything could be in the shadows. And they did a really good job of keeping Dracula or Orlok or whatever you want to call him in the shadows for a lot of the movie. They really hide his design. I won't comment on his design just yet. I don't know if I like it or not. I'll just say I'm very in the middle, but they do a really good job of hiding him. And I do like that. I do miss movies hiding the monster, because a lot of modern horror movies, they just show you the monster right away. And a lot of times that's just because everything that comes out now is a sequel. Like, there's no point in hiding the Predator now. They hid him in the first movie. We know what the Predator looks like. So when you're making the 70th Predator film, there's no reason to hide the Predator. So I get that. But even ones like A Quiet Place, like they show you the monster immediately and stuff. There's a lot of movies that just show you the monster right from the start. And I appreciated one keeping him mysterious and creepy for most of the movie. Another easy one to say is the acting. I thought across the board, the acting was really good. We do get the silly idea that Hollywood has that any European equals English. For some reason, it's supposed to take place in Germany. They swapped London for Germany, simply just because the 1922 film was a German production. So it's just kind of like paying their respects to the cast and crew of that original movie. But instead of making people talk like Germans, everyone just has a British accent. And Hollywood does this all the time. I mean, in like the Thor movies, everyone who's supposed to be Nordic is speaking with a British accent and all. Like, they just always do that. In every epic movie that Hollywood makes that's European, everybody's British. But that being said, the fact that the original story is supposed to take place in London, and the fact that everyone's acting is so good, I actually don't have a problem with it at all. And it was really nice. As a side note, I'll get back to the acting in a second, but as a side note, I do want to also mention that I was just really happy that we got a proper period piece, and it was the classic Gothic style horror. They didn't try to do like Dracula in modern times, Dracula in New York City or something. Like, all new horror movies are all these modern locations, the suburbs, the city. And I get very bored of that. One of my favorite things about horror is the gothic atmosphere. You look at the classic Universal movies or the Hammer films or just all of the Vincent Price movies, Roger Corman movies of the 50s, 60s, 70s. And like there were so many that took place in these beautiful but creepy, elaborate gothic mansions and manors and castles and graveyards and all that. And I just missed that atmosphere so much. It was really nice to see that brought back. It's really nice to see a period piece again. I'm so sick of modern horror. So I really liked that they did that. But back to the acting, I felt like Lily Rose Depp, who was playing Mina, I felt like she did a really good job. There were some parts where I think someone could argue she came off silly because she really went for it. There's parts where she's like possessed and she's kind of under a spell and she's acting nuts. And I could see some people saying some of the moments were funny, but honestly, I actually really respect how much she went for it. And I think the fact that she is so off the wall with her performance at times actually makes it a lot more believable. And I think she actually did a really good job. I already said Willem Dafoe was amazing. Bill Skarsgård, who is unrecognizable as Count Orlok, he's very good. I do feel like the over-the-top breathing that he does, where he is always just wheezing and growling like he's like a lion with asthma, I think is a bit over the top, and I personally feel like it was a choice they did because they thought his accent was too silly. He very much has the classic Bela Lugosi type of accent, the Romanian accent, and I guess they felt like it was too goofy because, you know, in this day and age, we've had Sesame Street, The Count, we've had Count Chocula, we've had Hotel Transylvania. Everyone's parodied that voice and made it goofy. Everyone laughs at it. Everyone says, "I want to suck your blood" at Halloween time, which he never said, and all that. So I think they thought like, okay, we're going to go with the true Romanian accent, but to prevent people from just laughing at it, we'll make him sound like a lion with asthma. And he's just constantly growling and wheezing and breathing really heavy, like he's the kid from Hey Arnold looking over Helga's shoulder. And I just felt like it was a bit over the top at times, and it was really excessive. But aside from that, I do think his performance was really good. He has a really strong presence in the movie. Despite the fact that he comes off as very feeble, like he's dying, he still has such a strong, commanding presence. And every other character in his presence feels so powerless. Like when he's with somebody, not only is he just so tall, he towers over everyone, he just has such a strong, powerful presence that everyone else feels completely helpless around him. And that's really hard to accomplish, but it's necessary in a Dracula movie. So I think they did a really good job. All right, now I do want to touch on the bad. Things I didn't like for it. First off, the worst thing about it, I think, is this movie is too damn long. It doesn't need to be as long as it is. Dracula's story has been told way shorter than this before, and better, in my opinion. I mean, even the original Nosferatu from 1922 is nowhere near as long as this movie. This movie is over 2 hours long, and even though I enjoyed the movie, I gotta be honest, it felt like it was over 3. It would not end. There comes a point where it should end, it feels like the climax, and then Dracula starts saying this whole speech about 3 nights, you have 3 nights, and every night something bad will happen, and it's like, oh my god, this movie's still going. Like, there's gonna be 3 more nights of this stuff, when I thought that was the climax. So, like, it overstays its welcome. There does come a point where you do just kind of start looking at your phone, your watch, or whatever, and just kind of thinking, like, this is getting kind of long. Are they gonna wrap this up soon? So I do think that's a problem. It does not need to be that long. There's some shots, as beautiful as they are, that go on way too long. There's unnecessary moments. There's parts that just, they draw out for no reason. They're not the most relevant parts, but they just go on so long. And I think there's a problem a lot of directors have these days, a lot of filmmakers. Usually I think it's because there's just too many cooks in the kitchen. There's too many people working on movies now. There's always like 50 writers and 20 directors and 17 editors. But I don't think that was the case for this movie. I think this movie's production was pretty straightforward. I think it's just like kind of self-indulgent, where a lot of these directors will not allow editors to cut out a lot of their stuff because they think it ruins their vision. But in actuality, I think it actually hurts the vision and slows it down and makes audiences less interested in it and less willing to appreciate a lot of the creative visual stuff, like the shadow of his hand cast over the city. That's really cool. That's a moment we can focus on for a long time. But then there's other things that just drag on so long and really aren't necessary. A very minor complaint, I don't even think it's a real complaint, but I would say a very minor complaint is they put pretty much every character from the novel in there, but no Quincy Morris. I don't know why these filmmakers hate Quincy Morris so much, but poor Quincy never makes it into like any Dracula movie. I think I think the only one he's ever been in is the Francis Ford Coppola one. I can't think. There's probably another one or two, but at the moment I can't think of another Dracula movie that has him in it. And I can kind of understand why. You know, it's a large party of characters, and Quincy doesn't really have a connection to anyone else. Like Dr. Seward is pretty important because he's the one who knows Dr. Van Helsing. He's worked with him before, so like he's the connection to Van Helsing. And Van Helsing is obviously important because he's the one with all the knowledge of fighting supernatural forces and defeating vampires. He's the one who makes the whole team realize that their enemy is a vampire. The Harkers are obviously essential because the whole story revolves around Dracula wanting Mina Harker and John Harker traveling to Dracula's castle to sell him a property in his home city. And he's spending the whole movie trying to get to Mina and warn her because he's seen Dracula, firsthand before anybody else. So they're very essential. And then Lucy is very essential because she's Mina's best friend, and when John isn't there, she's really her only friend. So I can understand that. And then, Lucy's husband, I actually always forget his name. I don't remember what his name is. But I can understand him being there because, again, he's Lucy's husband. Lucy's a pretty big character. Lucy's always a victim of Dracula, except for in the weird movies where they swap Lucy and Mina's names. But I totally get why all of them are there. Quincy Morris is just kind of another righteous dude. He's another guy who joins the fight. And I like him. I always hope Quincy will show up in the movies, but he never does. So it's not a big deal. I get why he's not there. This movie's bloated and long enough already. So I don't think we needed Quincy. I think he would have just been the character the audiences forgot about if he was in there. So I get why they got rid of him. But it just is a bit of a bummer that even in 2025, like how many years since the novel, we still never get poor Quincy Morris. Another problem I would say I had was, I don't want to say pacing, because for the first half of the movie, even though it's taking a long time for things to happen, I don't dislike the pacing, because I was really into it. I was on the edge of my seat for the first half of the movie, and I was thinking, like, wow, this is actually a really good Dracula film. Like, this isn't the best. I'm not going to say I like it more than, Bela Lugosi's performance in the 1931 one. There's plenty more that I like more, the horror of Dracula with Christopher Lee, even the original Nosferatu. Those are hard to beat for me. Those are just classics. It's hard for me to see a new take on Dracula, as good as it might be, and put it above those, which have just gained so much respect from me in my head over the years. But I was thinking, like, this is a damn good one. This is up there. This is a good version of Dracula. But then when I left the theaters, I didn't dislike it. I still thought it was good, but I was not thinking that highly of it. I was thinking like, yeah, that was pretty good. That was okay. because at some point halfway through the movie, it just gets way slower. A lot of scenes that are just kind of filler are really long. And they do start switching the plot around and introducing new ideas here and there. I'm not going to completely spoil them. There's some like turbulence between characters, which I could understand exploring it, but it didn't really seem to pay off in the long run. It seemed to just be like drama that came out of nowhere and then went away. And they do a twist with the ending. And again, I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to spoil it because, you know, I would say who cares about spoiling Dracula? It's a story from the 1800s. It's been adapted a million times. But this is different than most versions. They take a different stance than most versions. So I'm not going to spoil what happens. For the most part, it actually happens exactly how it did in the 1922 film, with the character who kills Dracula and how they kill Dracula. It's very similar to that film. Just the outcome is a little different. And I don't think it was a bad choice. It was a bold choice, but I don't think it was necessarily a bad one. But I think they thought it was going to kind of blow your mind more than it did. And like I kind of saw it coming from a mile away. So I think they try to linger on it. It's even like literally the last shot you see is lingering on it. And all I was thinking was just like, this isn't that shocking. I knew this was going to happen. So it doesn't end on a high note, unfortunately. I think it peaks in the first half. I think like when John is at Dracula's castle and all, I think those parts, I think actually when he's traveling to the castle might be the best parts of the movie. But when Jonathan Harker's traveling to and at the castle and you know, the early parts of the movie, I think those are the best. And I think, unfortunately, when you get halfway through, when Dracula is in Germany, I think it unfortunately dips a little in quality. But subjectively, I think it's not bad. It's just for me personally, it was getting too long. It was dragging on, and I just don't think the things that were happening were as exciting as how they were portrayed earlier in the film. A lot of this just comes down to the pacing, though, the length. I think the length is too long. The only other thing I will say is a negative for me is it's not a problem just with this movie. It's a Robert Eggers issue I personally have. He's a great director, but in all of his movies, The Witch, The Lighthouse, I haven't seen The Northman, but I've heard it happens a lot in that. Just really violent animal deaths, and they serve no purpose. They don't serve the story. I feel like they're just there to be shocking and uncomfortable, and that never scares me. That never makes me be like, ooh, this movie's got balls. All it ever really does is just kind of piss me off and take me out of the movie for a second and make me think like, why would you put that in there? That's just gonna piss me off. No one likes seeing that. No one should like seeing that. And it just seems like gratuitous. I don't know why he puts that in every one of his movies, but he puts it in every single movie, and I hate it every time he does it. There's a scene with Renfield involving like a pigeon or whatever, and it's disgusting. And I really hate how that's in every one of his movies. And like I said, like other than that, I love his movies, but he just always finds a way to put that in there. And I that's already a problem in the horror genre as a whole. As a horror fan who hates seeing bad things happen to animals, I already have a really hard time finding any horror movies that don't do that. But it seems like Robert Eggers, it's like guaranteed, like it will be in there. And I know that's a personal preference. I know for some people, they can disconnect. It's fiction for them. It doesn't bother them. They think I just sound like a big softie, but that's the one thing that like really bothers me. I guess the last thing I'll talk about is the design. of Orlok or Dracula or whatever. Which, again, is funny. The only reason to call a Dracula adaptation Nosferatu is to distinguish that, like, oh, this is one with ugly Dracula. You know, ones with sexy Dracula are just called Dracula. But ones with ugly Dracula, the films are called Nosferatu. Which actually, by the way, I love that they did call him Orlok in the movie and established that Nosferatu is just like a title. It's just like the creature itself. Because so many people these days think that that version of Dracula is named Nosferatu. And I know I've gone over this before in videos before. I know no one cares. I know I just sound like a nerd. But it annoys me when people call Count Orlok Nosferatu. Like, that's his name. Like, he's Joseph Nosferatu or something. Like, no, his name is Orlok. So, I do like that the movie establishes his name is Orlok, but the identity of the type of evil he is Nosferatu. You know, he's the vampire. So, I do like that they established that. But, anyway, his look, I do think he's imposing. He's gross looking. He's creepy looking. I really like what they did with his hands because, you know, the original Orlok had very long claw-like fingers. And they do a really good job of establishing that in this movie. And while his face isn't bad, I will say that there's choices that were made. The hairstyle he has and the mustache are a choice. Not going to say they're necessarily a bad choice. They might be. But they're definitely a bold choice. A friend of mine told me that the mustache was intentional, that it was a reference to Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, real life guy that people theorize Bram Stoker based Dracula on. Apparently, there's actually no real record of Bram Stoker ever saying that Dracula was meant to be Vlad Tepes. There very well could have been inspiration from him, but it seems like the inspiration for Dracula came from a multitude of places, one of which probably was Vlad the Impaler. But people love to run with this concept that Dracula is literally just Vlad the Impaler as a fictional character, and that's never been proven. But regardless, a lot of people associate Vlad with Dracula. It's undeniable. Like, a lot of people associate the two together. It's like considered common knowledge that they're related. And yes, if you've ever seen paintings or drawings of what Vlad Tepes apparently looked like, he had a goofy, dumb-looking stash. So I get why they did that, but personally, I think it is kind of goofy looking. And I do think it's hard to ignore. It really commands your attention. Anytime they show his face, you just look at that goofy mustache. And I feel like if you took the mustache off, Bill Skarsgård would actually look way creepier and way more like the original Orlok. Now, I'm not opposed to a new design for him. We already have the 1922 Max Schreck version. We're never going to recreate Max Schreck better than he did it. So I can support changing it. I just don't know how I feel about that mustache. He looks kind of silly with it, I'm not going to lie. And, you know, it's understandable that a count at that time, in that time period, would have a mustache. Like, that's probably very likely. But I don't know. It's just, it's a choice. And I do think it does distract from the rest of the design. And it doesn't make him look as, like, rat-like and evil looking, really, like he normally could have. And it makes him look a little funnier and goofier. It's like, oh, look, we took Count Orlok from Nosferatu and we put a Super Mario mustache on him. And it just takes away from the creepiness, I think, a little bit. Yeah, other than that, pretty good movie. I'd recommend any horror buff, especially classic horror buff, go see it. Check it out. It's worth seeing. I wouldn't say it's like one of the greatest things ever, but as far as recent horror goes, I enjoyed it a pretty good amount. Definitely worth checking out. Do all the liking and subscribing and the sharing and the bell stuff.